as I was in the visiting a mental asylum the other day, and one of the inmates said, Rabbi, despite what they tell me, I really am the Messiah. I said, really? Who told you that? He said, well, God did. And, pardon me. And so once again, despite what they say, despite what the doctors say, I really am the Messiah. I said, really? Who told you that? He said, well, God did. And I heard from the next room, I did not. So that's completely not relevant to our subject at hand, but that's okay. So we've been talking about how Yom Kippur and Purim are similar. And chapter 4 is going to point out some of the slight differences, but chapter 5 is going to really explore where Haman was coming from. And that's really where we're going over here, because we need to understand what is behind the whole idea of the lots in Purim. We're not focusing so much on Yom Kippur. We'll talk about some of those ideas, but that's really not the critical concept over here. So the Rebbe continues in chapter 4 and says, the two ideas represented in the name Yom Kippurim now can be understood as relating to each other. The Day of Atonement. Atonement from sin happens when elicitation is drawn from the master of will whose own desire had been abrogated. And Yom Kippur, similar to Purim, in which a lot was cast, because that lot descends from the same source, the master of will. So what we're talking about here is, of course, we started talking about this last time, where does teshuvah come from? Teshuvah comes from the fact that God is willing to supersede his own desire for the world in order to give us teshuvah. His desire for the relationship is greater than the desire for us to have followed his system and the system of reward and consequences that he set up. And Yom Kippur at the same time is also similar to Purim. Purim is the idea of lots, because the lot is also the idea of something that's beyond rationale, beyond the system. The Rebbe continues and says, however, Purim is greater in this respect than Yom Kippur. On Purim, this accomplishment of total atonement is done through joy and has no limitations. Whereas in Yom Kippur, complete atonement only occurs if one does teshuvah on that day. And this is because on Purim, the days themselves are called lots, when Yom Kippur is only similar to lots. Karu layamim ha'ele Purim. So that means the days themselves are beyond rationale. They're beyond the system. On the other hand, Yom Kippur is only Yom Kippurim. It's only similar to lots. So we see here that Purim is in fact much greater than Yom Kippur. So now let's look into chapter 5. We might have even done that chapter last time, but that's a pretty straightforward chapter, I think. But just to reference the fact that the difference, I did say that Yom Kippur has joy to it. But that joy is very much an internal joy. On the other hand, Purim, of course, is about complete and absolute overflowing joy. And so they're very, very different, of course, in how they express themselves. If somebody runs into Shul on Yom Kippur, the way he runs into Shul on Purim, I think that people get very upset. And of course, if somebody treats Purim the way that we do Yom Kippur, people will be very confused. So we understand that there are different aspects and they reflect differently. But what the Rebbe is saying here is with regards to these elements, the fact is that Purim is higher. And so we're going to understand why through this mimer and through several other ideas that we're going to discuss from other mimer. So chapter 5. The question then arises, if a lot represents such a high spiritual level, reaching the master of will, the level of God in which he decides where to project his will, which atones for all negativity. So in that case, what was Haman's aim in throwing lots. In addition, our opening verse references not just any lot, but specifically the lot that Haman threw, which was for the sole purpose of destroying the Jewish people. Why is the holiday named after that particular lot? And so this question, of course, goes way back to the beginning of the mimer when we asked this question in the first place. We need to understand what is so central of the story, and why is it so central that the holiday is named after not just any lottery, but Haman's lottery, which seems to reference the fact that he wanted to destroy the Jewish people instead of looking at elements of victory. So Rebbe says the answer lies in the following. Within the system of Ishtalshalut, human activity has meaning. This is very, very much in reference to what we discussed in the Maimer Lo Tiyeh Meshakela. That within the system, there's a give and take, and everything we do has a purpose, has even godly purpose. We have the ability to be able to interact. God recognizes and considers it. Within this framework, the main divine flow of sustenance is to the Jewish people, for it is they who fulfill the Torah mitzvot. We talk about Bereshit. Creation is described as Bet Reshit for two reasons. There is the beginning of creation. The two reasons are for the Torah and for the Jewish people. And this is the beginning of creation. The Jewish people don't even exist yet. But all of creation is created for us to be able to have the ability to be able to serve God through Torah and mitzvot. This is a side fact. We don't want to focus on this. But of course, non-Jews have the ability to be able to interact with God through the 7 laws of Noach. But that's our responsibility to give those instructions to them. And it's one of the reasons why we're referred to as the light unto the nations, is because we are meant to deliver these laws and this moral activity to the non-Jewish people. But those are elements of the world. The whole world was created for the purpose of elevation, and elevation happens when we fulfill God's will through doing what we need to with physicality, whether it's putting on tefillin, whether it's lighting Shabbat candles, or anything else that we. And so when we do those things, we draw sustenance into the world, because the world has its purpose. Its purpose is being fulfilled. Its purpose is being fulfilled. So therefore, it's all connected back to God. It's not something that's, God forbid, disconnected from godliness. It's not disconnected from its purpose. Indeed, and here I want to point something else. This was translated literally in this particular case for a specific reason. Our sages say that even those who are of the opposite ilk of the righteous are as full of mitzvot as a pomegranate as full of seeds. Now, of course, that's not a direct quote from the Talmud. The Talmud's quote is that even the wicked are as full of mitzvot as the righteous are full, as the pomegranate is full of seeds. But the Rebbe used the term here, the opposite of the righteous. The Rebbe refuses to use the term the wicked with regards to the Jewish people. And stylistically, that's something that's classic of the Rebbe, where the Rebbe always finds the positivity and always focuses on the positivity and always avoids making reference to the negative if he only can, unless it has to do specifically with a legal decision or has to do with a very specific approach that needs to be clarified at the moment. And that's in general the Rebbe's approach. And the Rebbe spoke about it very, very much, that when we speak, we create energy. And the more we speak about negativity, we give more energy to the negative. But particularly in this mimer, because like we said, here the Rebbe's, this is all coming with the backdrop of Stalin and the Jewish people being severely threatened. So I find it particularly, powerful when you think about the Rebbe the fact that the Rebbe is focusing on the goodness of the Jewish people and refusing to even call any Jew wicked. They're the opposite of the righteous.
Rebbe,
As the verse says, Ashkifa mim'am. Go ahead.
I wanted to say, if you say
Question?
the opposite, if you say the opposite of something positive, of course, you're talking about something negative. You're just not describing it in a negative way.
Exactly. Exactly. And the point is not to give, to be stuck on and to give focus on anything that's negative.
Right.
Yeah. So the verse says, glance from your holy abode in heaven and bless your nation Israel. The term heaven alludes to the earliest stages, the highest stages of Ishtavshalut. And the term nation includes even those who deserve the opposite of praise. So once again, instead of saying they deserve, I'm going to say the word curses, the Rebbe uses the term the opposite of praise. The word Amcha Yisrael refers to everybody, that everybody in the Jewish people is worthy of receiving blessing. And from that perspective of heaven, the highest level of Ishtalshalut, blessings are bestowed upon Israel. And now Haman understood that whatever decrees he would enact upon the Jewish people, there could be no comparison between himself, Haman HaRasha, Haman the wicked, as he's described in the Megillah, and the Jews, of whom even the lowliest is full of mitzvot. You can't possibly compare. So if he's going to try to appeal to God, so to speak, and saying, okay, we need to destroy this Jewish people, and he presented his case. But no matter how he presents his case, the fact of the matter is that, who are you? He is Haman HaRasha. And the Jewish people, even the lowliest of the Jewish people, is full of. And so therefore he did a lot, thinking that in a divine space where human activity is meaningless and dark and light to God are absolutely equal, there would be a possibility that he could succeed in destroying the Jewish people. Now suddenly Haman becomes a Kabbalist. Now suddenly Haman has a certain mystical insight to him. He recognizes that God is, of course, beyond everything. He recognizes that God loves the Jewish people. And he thinks that God loves the Jewish people because, well, the Jewish people are full of mitzvot. So if we supersede the mitzvot, if we go to a space where everything is just random, then why should the Jewish people win out? God's beyond. God is by himself. God is truly beyond any rationale. God is truly beyond any people. And so therefore, with the throw of the dice, we should be able to reach that space in godliness where dark and light are equal. And so therefore, let the light. So this is a remarkable perspective. And we want to point out before we head into the next chapter that, like I started saying, he presented his case, so to speak, before God. The Kabbalists talk about the fact, and we're going to mention this in just a moment, that Achashverosh is oftentimes not just an element of the embodiment of the Persian king. Achashverosh is also a reference to God. And it's hidden within the Megillah. And when Haman presents his case to Achashverosh, he says, there's this nation that's different from all other nations. Their laws are different. And he presents things in such a way that basically that tries to differentiate. And hidden within that is also his claim to God. They're different, but they're not following those laws. Those things that you wanted them to do, they're not doing. And it's important to point out that when we're talking in the reference of this whole story, the whole story of the Megillah, we're not talking about the Jewish people when they are at a climax of spiritual life. We're talking about when they are in their first true exile. They've been sent out of their country, and they're not just, they've not just been exiled, but they've gotten to the point of exile that they've lost their own self-value. And you see that in the opening chapter of the story. The opening chapter of the Megillah talks about the parties that Achashverosh threw, to show off his wealth. Now, part of the showing of his wealth was described in the Megillah as that kelim mikelim shonim. He put them in different vessels. Or does it make a difference? No kidding, he's going to put the food in vessels. So why does the Megillah have to say that? So the Medrash explains that he put the food and he exhibited the kelim, the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash. He was showing off how he had conquered the Beit HaMikdash. And part of the reason why he was throwing this massive party was because he felt that he had conquered over the Jewish people to the point that they could no longer come back. That the Beit HaMikdash was not going to be rebuilt at all. That was one of the reasons for his throwing this massive party. And the Jewish people not only came to the party, but the Medrash describes them as nenu misudato shel rasha. They enjoyed the party. So here they are, 60 years within living history of the time that the Beit HaMikdash has been destroyed. So within a period of time in which people actually remember the Beit HaMikdash, they actually remember the trauma of the Beit HaMikdash and all that. And here the conquerors are showing, technically speaking, not exactly the conquerors, but certainly related. Achashverosh's wife Vashti was Nebuchadnezzar's granddaughter. So yes, he was conquered by the Babylonians, and these are the Persians, but this is a direct continuation, even if the name on the jersey has changed slightly. And that's actually part of the discussion between Achashverosh and Vashti. The reason why Vashti didn't want to come to Achashverosh is because she says to Achashverosh, "You're only king because of me. My grandfather was the king, and that's the reason why you became king." And so that's the reason why he felt the necessity to put her to death, because now he's being challenged. Now his whole monarchy is under especially public assault, because his wife publicly sent the message back saying, you're not real, you're just a lackey, and I'm the real power behind the throne. So in that case, he had to do away with her. And that was his perspective of it. But despite all that, despite the fact that the Jewish people certainly knew this, they recognized that these were the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash. They recognized that his perspective was not to be a welcoming and to make the Jewish people, shall we say, a melting pot and bring them into the society and give them respect and anything like that. They recognized that his approach was to show that they had been destroyed, and that the temple, which was the center of their Jewish life, had been destroyed and was taken over. All that. Still, not only did they go to his party, but nenu misudato. They enjoyed his party. So that gives you a sense of how low the Jewish people were at the time. And despite that, and that's of course what led to the fact that Haman could make this decree in the first place, the fact that they had descended to such a low level, and that's the reason why there was an opening for Haman to have this conversation, so to speak, with God. But even with that, the fact of the matter is that there's a relationship that's beyond just Torah and mitzvot. And that's what we're going to get. That even though the lottery is such a high spiritual level in which it's beyond rationale, it's random, it's totally unexpected, there's something that's beyond that. And that's what we're going to see soon. Chapter 6. So this can be connected with the saying that Achashverosh is an amalgam of the words chash and rosh. Chash, as we see, means silence, and rosh is not resh aleph shin, which means head, but resh vav shin, which means poison. So the Rebbe explains, chash means silence, silence which is above speech. As the Talmud says, a word is worth one selah, silence is worth two. It's a great quote. Basically, if you translate it into English, it would be a word is worth a buck, silence is worth two. So the source of speech is in Chachma. Chachma, of course, is wisdom, while the source of silence is in Keter. Keter, of course, means a crown. A crown, as we've described in the past, it's something that encompasses the mind. It's something that is above the mind. It's something that is representative. Now, of course, there's a type of silence, which is the silence, which is the lack of knowledge. We've spoken about there's above intelligence and there's below intelligence. Below intelligence is what we typically think of, but there's a silence that is beyond intelligence. And that's what we're talking about here when we say that a word is worth one selah while silence is worth two, because silence has the ability to be able to draw within it much, much, much greater capabilities. And he continues and says, the Mishnah states the fence around wisdom is silence. And go back to all these quotes about silence is golden and all that kind of thing. And the idea that here, in a deeper vein, the Rebbe explains, this means that the encompassing element beyond Chachma is Keter, silence. Siag lechachma shetika means that the surrounding element of Chachma, the transcendent element of wisdom, is silence. Accordingly, Achashverosh also means the one to whom the beginning and end are his. Acharit v'reshit shelo. Meaning the light of Soviv, in which the beginning and end are equal. So we're talking about the transcendent elements of God. We're not just talking about God as he is within the parameters of the world. Achashverosh seems to be this element of beyond. And so therefore, Haman is connecting with God as he is beyond. That Acharit v'reshit, the beginning and the end, top and the bottom are all equal. They're all the same thing. So now the question arises, of course, but now that we're saying that Achashverosh references those extremely high elements of divinity, how does that connect with the Talmudic explanation of the Persian king's name? That Achashverosh means the man under whose rule the Jews' face were blackened. That was the Hebrew for that was Biyamav Hushcharu Panav Shel Yisrael. That Achashverosh has the letters that spell the word Shachor, which means darkened, that the Jewish people, and under his rule, the Jewish people were embarrassed and cast down and degraded to a tremendous level, and that's the reason why his name is Achashverosh. So wait a second. Is Achashverosh a reference to God as things are on the highest of levels, in which we see that there's no difference between anything, that God is truly transcendent? Or is Achashverosh referencing a king in his life? The Jewish people are completely degraded. Which one? And the Rebbe explains that in truth, one leads to the other. Since Sovev is the divine perspective in which darkness is equal to light, therefore, through many degradations and contractions, the silence that is above speech can result in a negative concealment of godliness, to the extent that not only is godliness not discernible, but even the forces of impurity conceal godliness. So there's an element of godliness that is transcendent. And because of its transcendence, that's the source for negativity as we see it down in this world. Because in that space of godliness, there's a complete equality between absolutely anything. No human activity has particular relevance over anything else. There's no real goodness or evil, when it's looked at from a total and absolute, completely beyond perspective. And this is very troubling, and this is very difficult to deal with. And that's the reason why the Rebbe is going to take the next step to say, actually, while this is certainly one element of godliness, the idea of transcendence beyond the world, that's not where God truly lies. Because God truly lies in a place of absolute choice. That God can choose what he wants. God can choose to transcend. Can transcend even transcendence. And so what we're going to go back to here in the next chapter, we're going to, and we'll continue this and we'll probably finish it next week. But we're going to get to is back to the conversation, can God create a burrito that is so hot that he cannot eat it? And the Hasidic, or if you want to go back to the classic, can God create a rock that is so heavy that he cannot lift it? And the Hasidic explanation is, the answer is yes, and he can still lift it. Because limitations are only within the framework of creation. God can create limitations and supersede those limitations. Our minds cannot possibly understand that because we're not God. But what we will see is the fact that God chooses the Jewish people despite anything, no matter what. And it's completely regardless of how good we are or how bad we are. It's completely regardless of any quality or any lack. And that choice is what supersedes any circumstance. And so that's what we're going to talk about. But until right now, we've seen this basic idea of that Haman was trying to get to a place of godliness, of divinity, in which there's total transcendence. He thought that God has a point where God can no longer care. God does no longer care about one thing or the other because God is totally, truly above. And so he figured, okay, we're going to throw lots in order to be able to get to that space. But he didn't realize that actually there's something that's beyond that. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah,
Mr. Resnick, go ahead.
When you said one word is worth one word, because the print is missing some letters.
Oh, okay. One word is worth one selah, like $1.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. And 2 is worth 2. Excuse me, and silence is worth 2.
Right.
This has been another mystical diversion, and I hope everybody's coming along with it. But in the meantime, and I wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom to another meeting quickly.
Yes.
But everybody,
Rabbi, same to you. Thank you.
Have a great Shabbos. Reden is silver and Schweigen is gold.
Good morning, everyone.